Hi folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to check out Rise to Power. It's a game for 2 to 6 players for ages 14 and up, with the average playtime being between 30 and 45 minutes. So what is Rise to Power? Well, it's a city building game, though not your average city building game. In most city builders that I've played, you deal with residential, commercial, industrial zones. You've got electric power, you've got water, that kind of thing. Everything that you might come to find in Sim City. Well, Rise to Power takes place in a futuristic world where Prism is the primary source of power. And in this game, players are going to be trying to activate contracts, which in turn allows them to grow their city with buildings by playing Prism cards. There's also some special abilities that come into play. So let's just go ahead and take a quick look at the components and see how the game is played. Okay, so what you're looking at here is a typical game setup, though keep in the back of your mind that I only have it set up for one player. Just imagine that there are some other players on the other sides of the screen. So what you got going on here is a deck of Prism cards. What you want to do is shuffle those up, and the Prism deck consists of different cards. You've got green, blue, and orange, and that just represents the different prism that you'll need in order to power these contracts. So you'll need this green prism here to power these green contracts, and so on. There's even some gray prism in here that act as wild cards. Speaking of contracts, these cards are double-sided. You've got the contract on one side, and you've got the completed building on the other side, or the powered side. Basically, what will happen is the contracts will start on this side next to, say, your power plant, and then whenever you power them with your prism cards, you'll flip them over like so to indicate that they're powered. And then at the beginning of the game, what you're going to want to do is shuffle this deck and then put out 4. Now, some of these cards have pips on them, and you'll want to remove them based on how many players are playing the game. Like you've got 3 here, so that's meant for a 3-player game or more. Some of these even have like 4 or 5 on it. So you'll have to go through this ahead of time and pick out the appropriate cards depending on how many people are playing the game. You've also got this exchange card, put that off to the side. You've got these corporate agendas here, and basically you're going to shuffle these up and deal out so many based on how many people are playing the game. These are sort of like public objectives that everyone's going to be trying to complete. The first player to complete these will actually get that card and will get some points at the end of the game. You've got player mats here, and what you're going to want to do is put these little black tokens here on their default values. You've got 2, 4, and 4. And that's basically, these are trackers, and you'll be moving these markers along these tracks as you add more cards to your city and increase these respective abilities. Like some of these will allow you to increase your hand limit, your draw power, how many cards you can draw at one time, that kind of thing. Each player starts with 2 of these prism cards and 1 of these power plants. One quick thing to note before we get started, the game does include a number of different expansions. Like you've got these prism towers, you've got CEOs that have special abilities, you've got government contracts and the like. These are optional. You do not need to include them. I highly recommend that you don't, at least until you understand what's going on here. The game isn't that difficult to play. It's just there's so many different components and so many actions you can take. Sometimes you can get overwhelmed, but once you actually put everything together in your head and understand what's going on, then maybe you can start including some of those expansions. Okay, so what you're going to do at the beginning of your turn is acquire 2 contracts. And what you're going to do is you're going to take 2 contracts from here. And you're going to want to take contracts based on what cards you have in your hand. Like I've got 2 blue here, so it makes sense for me to grab the blue contracts wherever possible. Now, you do not refill this until the cleanup phase. So I'm just going to grab, say, this one over here. Now, you can only put unpowered land or contracts next to a powered structure. In this case, the only one that you have right now is your power plant. You're limited to 4 at most right now. But once you start flipping these over, you'll gain the ability to put more of these contracts down onto your grid. So once you do that, then you have 2 action points to spend. You have 6 different abilities. You've got Draw Prism, and again, that's based on your draw power here. So if I were to do that, I would simply take 2 cards. This top one is your draw power. So I could take 2 cards from the deck to add to my hand. That's 1 action. I could power a contract by paying the appropriate amount as long as the color matches. Now, if you get an exact match. Like if this says a 4 here, but if I did have a 4 in my hand and I were to play it, I would get a bonus action point for playing the exact amount, sort of like an Alhambra, if you ever played that. But if I were to play this 5, I could discard it and then flip that over, power it, and then, that would add to my point value at the end of the game and give me whatever ability was on the other side. So I could do that. I can upgrade a district. The way that works is, let's say this was powered at some point. And if there's another offshore marina, which here's one here, let's just say that that was a contract that was out here at one point. I added it to my grid on a future turn, and I did spend the prism required to power it. Instead of flipping it over and making it its own entity, I could flip it over and then add it to this. Now the stipulation is that the number in the bottom right hand corner here has to be lower than the number that's currently there. This says 4, this says 1, so that would be allowed. And the nice thing about this is that it saves space, meaning that this doesn't count toward this extra card does not count toward how many cards you can have on your grid at one time. And on top of that, you get bonus points every time you stack cards. So not only do you add the 4 and the 1 together to get your point value at the end of the game, but you also get bonus points based on how many you stack. So there's actually some rewards for going the extra mile and upgrading your districts like that. You've also got this use exchange ability. Instead of powering a district, you can actually turn it over into the exchange. And whenever you do that, you actually flip it over to its powered side, and that allows a player on a future turn to grab it and then put it onto their own grid. However, each of these contracts actually has an ability listed down here. So basically, you're giving up your right to build it in order to use these special abilities, like upgrade a district up to 2 levels. There's different things like that throughout the deck. So you could take the chance of using a special ability, but at the same time, you're giving an opponent a potential free property or contract that they could use and instantly power. They don't have to spend Prism to do it. And that actually leads me to the next ability, Take from Exchange. So the opponent on a future turn could take this, add it to their grid, and that's that. So that's pretty easy. The last thing that the player could do is challenge a contract. Let's say that my opponent here had something on his grid, it was unpowered. I could go ahead and say, you know what, I think I'm going to go ahead and take that from you and put it onto my grid and I'll power it. I've got the cards to do it. Now, your opponent can say, well, I don't have the cards, so go ahead. Or they could say, you know what, I have the cards in my hand, I was just waiting for you to do that. He can go ahead and spend the prism necessary and instantly flip it over, leaving you you just can't take it. And the reason that's actually good for the opponent is because he doesn't have to spend an action point in order to do it here. So you can sort of bluff your opponents a little bit by holding on to cards and not powering your districts. And then when they challenge you, you can get a free action and just power it, even though it's not your turn. So that, there is some strategy there, some bluffing. And those are the 6 different actions that you can do on your turn. And then finally, you'll go down to the discard, which, again, that's based on your particular value here, and you'll be able to adjust these values as you power more stuff. Refill, and then power the exchange. So that means flipping these contracts over to the other side. So we're going to refill that, and that would end this particular player's turn. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Players will continue taking turns acquiring 2 contracts. If they can't fit any more contracts onto their grid because they've reached their grid limit, based again on their player mat over here, then they just skip that step. But basically, players will continue taking turns, getting prism cards, spending that prism in order to power these contracts over to their powered side. And as soon as a player gets 8 powered contracts onto their grid, that'll sort of signal the end of the game. Each player will get, one last turn so that each player has an equal number of turns, an equal chance to actually, possibly catch up if they are falling behind. The other way that the game can end is if this contract deck runs out. And then at that point, players will go ahead and add up their points. Again, you get points from these agenda cards as you satisfy them. For example, have a level 3 district, be the first to have the following district: spaceport, biosphere, and space station. So there's various agendas to shoot for, and then you'll be adding those points together, whatever you've managed to accumulate. You'll also take into account the victory points that are on the bottom of these cards. Only the powered ones count. And then whoever has the most points at the end of the game will win. Alright, so there you have it, a very brief look at Rise to Power. It's important to stress that I did not cover all of the rules found in the manual. This was just to give you a general overview, and I have to stress general because there's a lot of things that I skipped that I should have covered. But hopefully this gives you the basic idea so that you know how the game is played and whether or not it's something that you'd like to pick up. As far as what I thought, I do like this game. It's different than the other city builders that I've played. I do like the bluffing mechanics in this game, again, with the whole challenge a contract thing, where, you do have the ability to power these contracts, but you're not going to do it right away because you're hoping that your opponent will challenge it, and then you can instantly power it for free without having to spend any action points. You're not doing it on your turn, so it doesn't cost you any action points. So there's that bluffing mechanic behind it. There's also some strategy and what kind of cards that you're trying to go for, what kind of cards you're adding to your grid. Because again, some of these cards have passive abilities. They increase your draw power. They increase how many cards can be added to your grid. They increase your hand limit or whatever, that kind of thing. So there are some passive things that you're going to want to look for whenever you're looking at the contracts here to see which ones you want to pick up. And also on top of that, some of these exchange abilities are pretty darn powerful. So you could really pull ahead if you time one of these right. But the downside is that you're basically giving your opponent a free structure with which to build without having to worry about it. So, and helping yourself, you're helping your opponents. So there's a lot of timing in this game. The learning curve, I think, is moderate. Again, I think the biggest learning curve here is figuring out how all of these different abilities and actions tie together to form one coherent game. Once you get the basic flow of play down, then I think the game is relatively easy to play. But when you're looking at it for the first time, you're looking at all these symbols and all of these colors, and some of these cards are double-sided, and you've got a player mat with 3 trackers on it, and you look at it and you're like, oh my, what am I going to do? But once you figure out how everything flows, then it's relatively fun and easy to play. So if you guys want to, check out my full review at www.dadsgamingaddiction.com. If you haven't already, subscribed to my YouTube channel. That way you can keep up to date with any new content I happen to publish. This is Vince. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.